Hello, I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. I'm going to talk today about the experiment in which I've been engaged for the last 3 weeks or so since I announced that there's a turning point here in InPresence, and I began talking about such notions as spiritual transmission and telepathic hypnotic induction and so on. I am aware of criticisms that have been raised recently. Today is Tuesday. I'm making this video on Tuesday, and I've just read the criticisms that Steve Stanall and Daryl and a few others have mentioned. People who are uncomfortable with the idea that I begin these videos by staring into the camera and concentrating. Well, it feels to me like I am sending you something very positive, perhaps at a telepathic level, but I understand that some of you are uncomfortable with that, and others of you have said, well, you're really uncomfortable with yourself, and Jeffrey should go ahead and do what he wants to do. But here's how I feel about it. I don't want viewers to be uncomfortable, and furthermore, I have told you earlier, I'm a secular person. I don't want to set myself up as a guru figure. On the other hand, I'm well aware of the fact that there are extensive traditions in the spiritual literature relating to the use of telepathy as part of the interaction between a spiritual teacher and acolytes, novices, students, disciples. Various traditions use different words for it. And while I do not purport to be a spiritual teacher, I purport to be, if anything, a parapsychologist and a video host. Nevertheless, I am aware of the fact that there is this vast tradition in the spiritual literature about the use of telepathy as a form of communication, nonverbal communication, let's just put it that way, and that parapsychologists have virtually ignored all of this literature, and I don't think that's appropriate. So I do think it's good to experiment with it, but I also don't want these new thinking aloud videos to imply any sort of cultish behavior. I'm not trying to develop a cult of followers. I'd love to have an army of telepathic apes, so to speak, hairless telepathic apes. But I'm not interested in setting myself up in any way as a guru. So my intention in exploring these things with you is really coming from a scientific curiosity, a sense of my own personal development, and also an interest in exploring, as a parapsychologist, what is possible. Can we take some of the lessons from the spiritual traditions and apply them in a parapsychological context? Now, the first thought is no, because after all, these spiritual teachers presumably are highly advanced souls. If they're working at the dream level, at the telepathic level with their students, they're probably so advanced that they know precisely what they're doing and have guidance from their own lineage, etc., etc., etc. And here I am, one might say, an amateur, which is true. I don't have a lineage backing me up with any of this. But it has occurred to me there's something to be said for simply a transmission, one might say, of who I am. And who I am is this. I'm a man in my 70s. I've lived now, quite a few decades. I've been exploring this realm for half a century. I'm also a person who has achieved a few things that are very valuable in life. I've found my own path. I found it long ago, and I've been living my own truth. I've been centered in my own truth, more or less. It's not as if I've never been knocked off center, but I've had the privilege of living on course, on track, on purpose now, ever since, one might say, I had that dream of the Focus magazine back in 1972. So I do have something to transmit here. And what I'm thinking is, well, I'm thinking about the concept you sometimes hear in spiritual circles of darshan. Darshan is simply sitting with a spiritual teacher, being in the presence of a spiritual teacher. And I've had that experience on many occasions with a variety of spiritual teachers. I don't consider myself a spiritual teacher. It's not what I profess, but I'll say this. I don't consider myself not a spiritual teacher either. I am a conscious being, you have to say, a sentient being. That qualifies me as a spiritual person. I've had life experiences. I think I do have something to offer. So the trick is how to do that without alienating people. It's not as if I'm trying to do the Vulcan mind meld to control any one of you. I have no interest in controlling a single other human being other than myself. So, nevertheless, I don't want the new Thinking Aloud channel to become something that it was never intended to be. So here's what I'm thinking. At some point, it occurred to me it might be very interesting and very useful for me to create a video where I just meditate. I'll just sit in front of the camera and meditate, and if I feel this sensation that I have had that strikes me as if it's a psychokinetic transmission of, you might say, if I were to take all that I've learned and experienced in my 71 years and try to transmit that, that's what's coming through. And in a way, that's what I've tried to put into the rainbow yin-yang symbol also. Somebody just suggested it needs a little more black and white, but I'll have to give that some thought. But my point is this. I do plan, I'm going to create a video in which it may run for 20 minutes or a half an hour, and it'll just be there, me meditating. And for those of you who would like to experience a kind of a darshan with me, you'll see me meditating on your screen, and that's all you'll get. But I'm not going to put it on the new Thinking Aloud channel. I have another channel, the Jeffrey Mishlove YouTube channel, and I'll put it there. We'll keep it separate for those of you who want that. And I'm very curious because for me, this is like an experimental process. It's trial and error. And it's new for me. I've described this turn of events about 3 weeks ago in one of the InPresence segments. I do want to experiment, but I as I say, I have no interest in creating something that begins to take on the trappings of a cult. So just consider it me exploring things. I think there's much to be explored. I think that there are so many things that parapsychologists have learned, but so many other things, vastly many more things, of which I have inklings that I'd like to share with you from time to time. And the idea that because of the experiences of my life, that I do have something to transmit at a nonverbal level, I want to pursue that. But we'll keep it separate from anything on the new Thinking Aloud channel, at least in terms of the openings of the channels. Now, I'm getting ready to end this InPresence segment, and it seems to me that to have a little silence at the end is fine, because if you don't like it, just stop your video at that point. And I'll keep it going. I have one more thing to say. How did it start? Well, there's an interesting story there, because you see, normally at the beginning of every recording session, I start with at least 10, 15 seconds of silence. And the reason I do that is technical. It's because there's air conditioning, there's a fan in this room, there are sometimes background noises from the building here, and I capture those sounds and then I filter them out so that if you're listening to the audio, you don't hear that little hum or buzz or shh sound in the background. It gets all filtered out. I do that because perhaps we'll create an audio blog someday out of these videos. So that's kind of how it started. But I don't intend to continue with that practice any further. So those are my thoughts to share with you today. Of course, I am interested in your feedback. I do read the feedback. I don't respond very often because I'm also busy making these videos and editing them, doing other post-production. But once again, thank you so much for being with me.